Good evening, friends and neighbors. Or shall I say this afternoon?
We are about 1 month away from pitchers and catchers reporting for duty, so we're going to take an opportunity to talk about the top 10 franchises to use for a realistic rebuild in MLB the Show 23. Keyword being realistic. And again, we're not going to take the top 10 worst teams from last year and just say, here you go, and here's why you should pick them. We're going to think about this from a actual appeal perspective, which teams would be the most fun to take and use for a rebuild. The number 10 one on that list is going to be the Chicago Cubs. They won 74 games in 2022. They've got a lot of youth on offense, a lot of veteran presence in the bullpen as far as both starters and in relief. But they're consistent on that side of things. Offensively, they've got a little bit of pop, a little bit of team speed sprinkled in there, so they should be competitive yet again this year, especially when you consider that they added a number of free agents in the offseason that could hopefully get them over the hump if you're a Cubs fan. They picked up Trey Mancini just a day or so ago to a 2-year contract. They've got Dansby Swanson now, Cody Bellinger, Tucker Barnhart, an excellent defender, and a decent bat at times. And then they went and got arms like Jamison Tyon, Drew Smiley, who they can throw into their rotation, and Brad Boxberger as a relief pitcher is going to join the squad as well. So this is a team that could be competitive right away in 2023. You also have 3 top 100 outfielders in your organization that you could use as trade pieces. Brennan Davis has already cracked through to the major leagues and is still on that top 100 list. So look out for the Cubs here in the short term. Number 9 on the list is the Boston Red Sox. These guys finished 78 and 84 last season, so they're not that far out of the playoff picture. You also get the added benefit of getting to play at Fenway Park. You get the awesome rivalry games between the Red Sox and the Yankees, and you've got a lot of young potential on your offense with a blend of a little bit of experience with guys like JD Martinez and a few others. Your starting rotation is not terrible, but they're aging, so you don't really have any young arms to build around, and your bullpen is just average in general. You're also getting a little bit on the upward trend of the aging front in the bullpen as well, so you're going to kind of have to figure out how to get a little bit younger there and have some guys to build around. And in the offseason, what did they do but go and add Corey Kluber and Kenley Jansen that drives that average age even higher? Not really sure what you're going to get out of either of those guys this season, but at least they're active and going after guys with some at least name recognition that maybe give them a chance if they get into a pennant race down the stretch. Now, their number 1 prospect is Marcelo Meyer. This is the number 7 prospect overall. He is a shortstop with a solid bat and a solid glove. So he's a guy that gives them a little bit of reason for optimism in terms of on the offensive side of things. But I think the one question mark with this team is going to be, how do you build a pitching staff that's got some longevity over the next several seasons? But they are in a spot where they could hypothetically contend for a at least a division championship within the next year or so if they can stay healthy. Number 8 is the Miami Marlins. Now, this is a team that went 69 and 93 last year, finished 4th in the National League East. Now, 4th isn't at the bottom, but when you consider the 3 teams that finished ahead of them and the likelihood that those 3 teams are also going to be very competitive for the next several years, this one could be extremely challenging. Maybe reason why it could fall a little bit higher up this list, but nonetheless, I drop them in at number 8. This team has no offense, particularly no power. Chisholm is fun to watch, but I'm not sure that he's the kind of guy that you're going to want to have batting in the heart of your lineup every single day until he gets a little bit more consistent and maybe even adds a little bit more power. But again, he's a guy that, he's going to be a starter on just about any team in the league, pretty much any team in the league. So he's something that you can at least build around offensively, and they do have a little bit of team speed with guys like John Birdie that you can use to steal a bunch of bags. Now, their starting pitching is actually pretty solid, and they're fairly young, which is one reason why this team actually has a little bit of potential in game to be competitive within a couple of years, but they're going to have to figure out a way to score runs. Their bullpen has some solid veterans, so they just need to figure out a way to find some offense. They did sign Gene Segura in the offseason, but I'm not sure that that's going to be enough to make them contenders right away. Their number one prospect is Yuri Perez, who is listed number 9 on baseball's top 100. He's a 19-year-old pitcher with a fastball, curveball, changeup combination. Tops out in the high 90s, around 98 miles an hour, but typically is going to sit around 93 to 96. But definitely at that age, bringing that kind of heat, if he can stay healthy and maybe develop a fourth pitch, that guy could be an absolute stud by the time he reaches the majors. This is a team, like I said, probably not going to contend within the next few years, but they've got solid pitching. If they can figure out a way to score some runs, they can be competitive. Number 7 is the Kansas City Royals. They went 65-97 in 2022. You've got question marks with guys like Salvador Perez. Not sure if he is past his prime or if he's ever going to get back to the kind of offensive prowess that he was putting up for that 2 or 3 year stretch where he was just absolutely fantastic. You do have Bobby Witt, who a little bit of a question mark in himself. He's going to be pretty good. We just don't know how good. He's got a cannon of an arm, pretty good glove. He's got a little bit of speed. We just don't know what kind of offense to expect out of this guy just yet, but definitely a reason for people to go out and watch games at a beautiful Kansas City stadium there with the waterfall in the outfield. Now, they do have Andrew Benintendi, who's starting to get up there in age a little bit, but his bat is still just as consistent as ever from a, putting the ball in play perspective. He just has no power. I think he hit 3 home runs last year. He's a guy that I would like to see maybe sacrifice a little bit of the contact and try and hit for a little bit more power and maybe help this team generate some more offense. They've got Pasquantino at DH, who has some potential as well. He's a young guy who has some serious power. If he can stay consistent and grow into that role, that could be a piece in the middle of their lineup to perhaps build around with Bobby Witt Jr. Not sure what to expect out of Whit Merrifield going forward. He didn't really do well last season, and we haven't seen the same Whit Merrifield that we had in years past, where it was just impossible to get the guy out. And this is another team that, from a pitching perspective, they're young, just like the Miami Marlins, but these guys are probably going to struggle. Brady Singer is, probably the one that you can count on a little bit, but for the most part, the rest of that starting rotation is going to be sketchy. They do have a respectable bullpen, but one challenge with Kansas City is that you're going to probably have to build this team through free agents and through new draft picks, as their only top 100 prospect right now is a gentleman named Gavin Cross. I believe he's an outfielder out of Tennessee with an ETA to the MLB of 2025, and he is number 73 overall, if I haven't mentioned that. So not a lot coming up through the pipeline, but you've got some pieces on offense that are young and maybe give you a little bit of potential. You've got some young arms in the bullpen. If those guys can develop and be or in the starting rotation, if those guys can develop and be consistent, you've got a chance in that American League Central. Number 6 is the Colorado Rockies. Now, this is a team that maybe doesn't necessarily have a huge market in terms of fan base and, on or franchise players that would be interested in taking a crack at this team, but these guys finished 68-94 in 2022. They are in a obvious hitter's park, but I'm not really sure how much that translates in MLB the Show. But these guys do have some veterans on offense, so they should be relatively consistent on that front. But one challenge is that I don't know how much they've got coming up through the pipeline in terms of offense, with the exception of Brendan Rodgers, who's already at the major league level, but we don't really know what we're going to get out of him from a run production perspective. You had German Marquez, who struggled in 2022. You've got a ton of question marks in both your rotation and in your bullpen, with the one bright spot being Daniel Bard, who's your closer, but he doesn't do you any good unless you've got a late lead in a close game. And, that's just not going to happen all that much when you've got a team that's just not built that way. So, this is a team that has some intrigue just because you don't really have a ton to build around from a pitching perspective. Your offense is okay, but most of the better players are veterans. So it's going to take a lot of, savvy management to build this team into a powerhouse. You do have 4 offensive prospects in the top 100. So there you have a little bit of reason for optimism within a few years if you can get those guys into the major leagues and get them productive. But I keep them at number 6 because I just don't know how much intrigue they've got. Even though this one would be challenging and I think it would be interesting, the fan base just maybe not so much there in Colorado, but I peg them in at number 6. Number 5 is the Oakland A's. Now, they've got the worst stadium in sports, not just in baseball. It is an absolute dump. There's a ton of history in Oakland. Obviously, you've got the Moneyball story coming out of there, but that, chapter of this franchise is pretty much in the distant history at this point. They were very, very inactive in free agency this offseason, and these guys finished the worst in the American League with a record of 60 and 102 last season. You've got Cole Irvin as your ace, and he finished 9 and 13 last year with a 3.98 ERA, so not sure what you're going to get out of your pitching staff. Your offense didn't really have much team speed. Your best hitter was pretty much Seth Brown, who racked up 25 home runs and 73 RBIs. Not exactly all-star potential there, but a guy that's at least going to give you some production. Now, one thing that maybe you can get a little bit excited about, and I don't know how much this is going to translate in the show, but they did sign a starting pitcher out of Japan. I missed the first name, but last name is Fujinami. He could be used as a reliever because they actually used him as both last season in Japan. But this is a guy that has absolute smoke coming out of his hand, bringing speeds in the triple digits, and could give you a little bit of reason for excitement depending on how MLB the Show treats that acquisition in terms of ratings. The only other free agent acquisition that I would reference is Aletmus Diaz, who gives you a little bit of offense, but again, just probably not a whole lot there. This team just doesn't have a whole lot to get excited about, which is one of the reasons why they are intriguing from a rebuild perspective. They do have a first baseman / catcher in Tyler Soderstrom that is ranked 47th on the top prospect list, but that's their only one. He's got some pop, but they're going to have to figure out ways to get more and more youth and production in this squad. It's probably going to have to be a little bit of a blend of both free agency and good draft classes to get this team back into the win column. Now, these next 2 teams could probably be interchangeable in terms of the order, but I am going to stick number 4 as the Detroit Tigers. They finished with just 66 wins last year. They've got no offense. Their offense is so bad that they are moving their fences in this year to try and help bring some power back into their lineup. They have no speed either. Now, one thing that is interesting here in terms of rebuilding this team is that Miguel Cabrera is in the last year of his contract, and he's going to retire. That's going to free up some cap room for you. Depending on how MLB The Show handles budgets, that could be a huge difference maker. Now, they do have guys like Riley Green and Spencer Torkelson that give you a lot of reason for hope in the future because you've got offense in the outfield and at a corner infield position there. And then you've got a starting rotation that could be among the elite 1-2-3 combinations in the league with Tarek Skubal, Matt Manning, and Casey Mize. Also down the road, you've got a gentleman named Jackson Jobe, who was a number 1 draft pick for them, and he is probably a couple of years away from being major league ready, but brings a 4-pitch mix with a fastball, curveball, slider, and changeup, and has some serious upside himself. So they have some definite potential in terms of arms coming up through the ranks. If they can hold on to those guys and give them a little bit of offense, they could be dangerous. They do have a decent bullpen, and they lost Gregory Soto in the offseason with a trade to the Phillies. But as a Tigers fan myself, I can say that that might be a blessing in disguise because Gregory Soto, while he can be dominant at times, he is a little bit erratic and inconsistent. So it'll be interesting to see how he does for Philadelphia this year. But that's the one notable loss in terms of the bullpen that they've got on that squad. Again, lots of young talent that is coming up through the ranks, and with Riley Green and Torkelson already there in the majors, this is a team that's got a lot of potential. They just have to find ways to score some runs and maybe rebuild that pitching staff in terms of the bullpen just a little bit. Number 3 is the Cincinnati Reds. This is a team that the owner probably just needs to go ahead and sell and get it over with. Until that happens, this franchise is probably going to struggle. But in MLB the Show, we've got the opportunity to make the moves that we want to try and get this team back to being competitive. They won just 62 games last year, tied for last in the National League East with the Pittsburgh Pirates. They do have some, excitement on the horizon with a guy named Jonathan India. He's cracked into the major leagues last year and definitely is fun to watch. Not sure how consistent he's going to be as far as offensive production down the road, but you also have pieces like Drury, who is a very solid third baseman. He's going to give you a respectable batting average, hit for some pop, and you can kind of plug him in the middle of the lineup, and you're going to get decent production. If you can keep Tyler Stevenson healthy, you've got one of the best catchers in all of baseball, especially considering the kind of bat that he can bring to the lineup. You've got Joey Votto at first base. You're not going to get a whole lot out of him at this point in his career, but you do have a veteran presence there, a guy that's got you a left-handed bat, still plays pretty decent defense, and should hit for a respectable average, but the pop is probably not going to be there anymore for Joey Votto. In terms of the rotation, your staff is pretty young, so you have some upside there. We don't know exactly how good Hunter Green is going to be, but he looks like he could be a superstar if he learns to pitch. He definitely has the stuff, just has to learn to pitch. Their bullpen is atrocious, with the one exception being Alexis Diaz. However, you got to have leads for your bullpen to really help you late in the ball game, and that's going to be an issue with a team that only won 62 games last year. They did go and get Will Myers in free agency. They picked up Kevin Newman as a trade from the Pirates, so you get a little bit more offense right there. This team could maybe be a little bit more competitive there. One absolutely mind-boggling thing here is that they've got 5 top prospects in the top 100, and all 5 of them are left side of the infield guys. They're either third base, shortstop, or either third base or shortstop kind of thing, where they can play either position. But it's just interesting that you've got all 5 of them crammed onto that side of the field. What that tells me is that as a franchise manager, you could probably get away with moving 1 or 2 of those pieces, still have guys coming up through the pipeline, or maybe even trade a guy like Drury and get some value out of him that helps you kind of rebuild or fill a position where you need some help somewhere else on the diamond. So I pencil in Cincinnati at number 3, and that's a team that if they can, build some of those, or make some of those moves that we just talked about, could be competitive within a couple of seasons. Number 2 is the Washington Nationals. They were the worst team in Major League Baseball last year, winning just 55 games. The other challenge that they're going to face in terms of trying to rebuild this franchise is that you've got the Braves, the Mets, and the Phillies all in the same division. And oh, by the way, the Marlins were even better than you last season. So you're going to have a long way to go with this squad, but you've got Juan Soto. If you keep that guy healthy, you've got a chance. You have Josh Bell, who is maybe starting to get up there in age a little bit, but still going to be a productive player for you for the next several seasons. We don't know how much Keibert Ruiz is going to give you, but that's a guy that had tremendous upside when he was being called up. But again, maybe still too young to tell what you're going to get out of him, but you've got a nice little core there offensively, and then you've got a guy named Joey Meneses, who, in my opinion, is one of the most undervalued utility players in all of baseball. He hits for average, hits for some power, and he can play a bunch of different positions. That's the kind of guy. He hit, just give me a second here, 324 with 13 home runs in 240 plate appearances last season. That is excellent production and the kind of numbers that if you give him a full slate of at-bats, he's probably hitting upwards of 25 home runs with a pretty good batting average. You can throw him just about anywhere in the lineup that you want to, and the fact that he can play a bunch of different positions, I'm not sure why this guy isn't being talked about more than he is. Now, the biggest challenge with Washington is not their offense. It is their pitching. Their rotation is an absolute disaster. Patrick Corbin was just awful last year, and he's 29 years old, which makes him the youngest in their rotation. So that's going to be a challenge. Also, their bullpen is aging, so it's not even like you've got some young arms in the bullpen that can kind of balance out things there. Like you're just bad and you're getting old at the same time. That is a dangerous combination. So they're going to have to figure out ways to get better there. They went and grabbed Corey Dickerson off of free agency, who gives them a little bit more potential on offense. I'm not sure what they're doing in terms of pitching, and they lost Steve Cishek to retirement. So this bullpen that was already pretty bad just probably got a little bit worse, and yet another challenge for this team to try and overcome. Now, they do have 4 of the top 100 prospects in the game. 3 of them are outfielders. They've got one right-handed pitcher who does give them, a little bit of hope in that department. But again, all of this offense that we talk about with this team, no pitching, they're going to have to figure out ways to maybe move some pieces and get some arms that make this team a little bit more competitive on the defensive side of things. But pencil them in at number 2, and we are down to the grand finale. If you haven't figured it out by now, shame on you, because when we start talking about teams that need to be rebuilt and we look at the teams that we've already covered, it really leaves one obvious choice here, and that is the Pittsburgh Pirates. Another owner that just needs to sell the team. They finished 62-100, tied with Cincinnati for the worst record in the National League East, and it is a miracle that they won that many games. Kevin Newman was one of the bright spots on their team, and he's gone. You do have O'Neal Cruz, who has a world of potential. This guy is just a freak athlete, but that doesn't mean he's going to hit 350 with 58 home runs just because he can hit the ball really far and throw the ball really hard and run really fast. The tools are there, but he's going to have to figure it out at the major league level to be consistent, or else it doesn't matter. Now, you also have Ke'Bryan Hayes, who is still young and has had some injury trouble, but he's a solid player, excellent glove at third base, doesn't have the power that you would like to see out of a corner infielder, so if he can maybe bring that part along, you have one of the best left sides of an infield in the game. You've got Brian Reynolds in center field, who has been one of the bright spots for this team for the last several seasons. I think he had an atrocious 2020 in that shortened season because of COVID, if I remember correctly, but bounced back last year with pretty respectable numbers. I'm not sure how long they actually keep him around in real life, but if you keep him around in MLB the Show, now you've got a trio of players there between Cruz, Hayes, and Reynolds that maybe you can get a little bit excited about. You've got a guy coming off the bench who I call Jack Swingin' Sawinski, who hit a bunch of home runs for them last year in a lot of pinch hit situations, and a lot of them were big home runs to boot. He's got some pop. He's sort of an all or nothing type hitter, but another guy to sort of be aware of in terms of options that you've got on the offensive side of things. In terms of the pitching staff, you're mostly young, but you're also pretty raw. You got a lot of guys that are still learning to get it done at the major league level. Mitch Keller is your ace. He was okay last year, but definitely still trying to kind of learn how to pitch at the major league level. He doesn't necessarily have overpowering stuff, so he's going to have to get it figured out in terms of nibbling and working the corners and just learning how to pitch. Your bullpen is basically the same thing. You're kind of young, but you're just not very good. You have Bednar as your closing pitcher, who was pretty consistent for them, but not any good when you are losing constantly. So you got a lot of things going on there from a roster perspective. Now, one thing I also say about the Pirates is they've got arguably the prettiest stadium in all of Major League Baseball. Not that that's a huge factor in terms of, building a team around, but in terms of a franchise experience, I give that a little bit in the plus column. In terms of off-season action, Um, you've got McCutchen coming back. Not going to add a whole lot in terms of, consistent offensive performance, but a veteran presence that maybe he has a solid year and helps you in the next season or two. You also added Carlos Santana, kind of the same story there. Not sure exactly what to expect, but it's a veteran presence, and maybe he has stretches where he's consistent and hits for a little bit of pop and can help you out. You bring in G-Man Choi in a trade with Tampa Bay for a little bit of offense as well. That's a guy that, if I remember correctly, is a walks machine and just gets on base, but not a ton of pop, not a ton of defense. So I think the weakness of this team is definitely the pitching, but there are numerous weaknesses that we could point out if we had to. Now, the other thing that helps this team in terms of making them an attractive option from a rebuild perspective is they've got 6 prospects in the top 100, and 3 of those are expected to reach the majors this year. 2 in 2024, the other in 2025. So you've got some guys coming up through your minor league ranks that give you some reason for hope. You just have to continue to build around your core, try and get younger where you can, get more consistent where you can, and hopefully pick up some W's here and there. That's your top 10 for teams to choose for a rebuild in MLB the Show 23. I hope that this has been exciting and entertaining for you. If you have any comments, please throw them into the comments section. If you haven't done so already, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and thanks for watching.
Good evening, friends and neighbors. Or shall I say this afternoon?